Hey everyone, it's Owen here from OTech, and today I will be doing a video that's a little bit different than usual, since it's mostly because I have a lot of assignments and tests since I'm in college right now, so I couldn't do with a lot of videos that require a lot of time to make and a lot of basically editing and recording, like my usual reviews or unboxings or things like that, and especially because I don't have a lot of products on hand anymore that I could just easily borrow or buy, and because it's expensive to keep buying things, I figured that I would do something else that's a little bit different and something that I think would also benefit you guys while also making it easier for me to make it more frequently. So I've never seen anyone done this really, so here goes nothing, I guess. So my idea is to make a review a review summary of a product that I find interesting or that is quite popular. So, for example, that I wanted to review this certain product and I don't have it on hand. So, what I do is that my idea is that I would look around in the internet for its reviews and also, for example, even reviews on Amazon or Newegg or things like that, and I would basically compile it all into one summary that you guys can understand if the product is good or not and what are my thoughts on it, since sometimes I have thoughts about some products after reading the reviews or even just looking at it, and some things that I want to share with you guys, but I can't really do it since I don't have the product, so I couldn't make a video of it. So I thought this is one way to do it without actually having the product with me. So this is gonna be more or less kind of less edited and more raw, so it's more informal than my usual videos, but I hope that you guys would also find this still interesting. But anyways, tell me what you guys think on the comments below after you watch this video. If you like it, then please tell me. If you don't, then please let me know as well. But anyways, yeah, this is one of the ways that I think of so that I could make more videos more often. So anyways, let's get to it right now. And I'm sorry if you can hear like the raindrops on my roof, since I'm in like a rental room and in someone's house, and the roof is quite thin, so you can really hear the noise, and it's kind of annoying. But yeah, anyways, let's get on to it. Here it is from Guru 3D. Basically, they got the standard edition one, the reference cards, and you can see that it's a pretty much like a black brick, and their press material looks really cool, so I would really love to get some of that AMD if you would like to send me some samples, maybe in the future when I have more followers and subscribers. But anyways, this is all I can do for now. I can show you guys like the pictures, and I'll give a link down in the descriptions of all the websites that I visited while I'm doing this video. So the VRM is staggered along the sides of the GPU instead of like on one bank beside the GPU like usual, because they don't need to put memory chips beside it. And what this does is that it reduces the distance from the VRM's components to the graphics core itself, so it should provide more stable power, and in theory it should provide better overclocking, although that still depends pretty much on silicon lottery. But yeah, here anyways, you can see that the VRM is laid out along the sides, and there's also thermal pads that cool it by connecting it to this like metal unisync on the heatsink blower card design itself. And you can see that the PCB is actually pretty bare on this side. It's basically just fan mounting holes and a whole lot of nothing. Maybe just filtering chokes, but not much else. And this side is where all the things are. So here's the core itself, and you can see that this time AMD also just used 2 stacks of HBM, whereas otherwise on the Radeon Fury cards, Radeon Fury X, you can see that they have 4 stacks of HBM on the core itself. Like for example, you can see over here they have 4 stacks of HBM1, while AMD has downgraded it sort of to just 2 stacks, although they maintained pretty much the same amount of bandwidth, or at least like a huge amount of bandwidth still. even though it still has the same 4096 cores as the Fury X, although it's a smaller process and it clocks higher, so it should perform better. with the same specs as in like in a course. Now it also uses the IR35217 controller for the VRM. So this is a pretty much a well-used controller that is supported by a lot of overclocking tools, and you can pretty much just control the voltage all you want. But here's the problem. The performance, which you can see, and this draws about like basically 300 watts if you see the result later, with the two 8 pins, because 150 and 150 and basically 300 watts, although realistically those connectors can go much higher. And it also has these like LEDs that show the power consumption and GPU load. We can also see the insides of the card. Here's the heatsink. Now the heatsink is also a vapor chamber, and this time is quite an upgrade compared to the previous AMD cards, which the Hawaii cards, they just use the same vapor chamber or heatsink from the 7970, but this time AMD used a larger one, which cools better for Vega, and especially because the die is bigger, it's kind of easier to cool. So this is the best performing AMD reference cooler that AMD has ever made. So as you can see, here's the vapor chamber. So it's basically a single block of copper, which is hollow on the inside. So you can see that this part here is like a bubble. So it's hollow and it's filled with water inside the copper, and that is what transports the heat around to the fins, which is pretty dense, and it's cooled by this delta fan, which spins at like a freaking 5,000 RPM, which is super high. So it's bound to be noisy. And yeah, the architecture is similar to previous GCN. It's just like a slight bit of tweak, and they also have the new primitive discard, which is basically throwing away things that aren't seen in the final picture. Although I've heard that it can glitch out if you overclock too much and sometimes make the scene basically blank or a lot of blank spaces. So in 3D Mark, you can get a higher score by just glitching out the primitive discard on the GPU core itself, which is the part that discards part of the scene in the game or a render that isn't rendered in the final scene to make it faster to render. The performance of the GPU is pretty much just like a GTX 1080. Well, this is higher in Battlefield 1, although that's DirectX 12. And you can also see that, for example, in older games, it loses to the 1080. So you can pretty much draw the conclusion, at least from all the reviews that I've seen, that Vega, just like every AMD cards, work better in DirectX 12. And that's because AMD's architecture is much wider and more parallel than NVIDIA's architecture, especially with NVIDIA also having higher clock speeds. So their architecture is more suited to DirectX 11 than DirectX 12 compared to AMD. And if you're curious about Ethereum mining, I guess you can see that Tom's Hardware shows the results as in 30 mega hash. So that's kind of pathetic in stock form, since it draws so much power, and you can overclock and BIOS mod an RX 580 to pretty much that clock speed. And that brings us to the problem that I see with Vega as an enthusiast, because usually AMD is pretty lenient on these kind of things, and this is pretty much concerned with overclocking and also BIOS modding. Now the Vega cards, RX Vega 64 and 56, they have a strict power limit, so it cannot go over that. And usually on AMD cards, you can just take a BIOS modder application and just tweak it up yourself. Like I did with my graphics card, my RX 580s. I just tweaked it up so that it can consume as much as 400 watts if it wants to, because it can take it. The VRM won't blow up, so just let it do that. And because of that, it lets me overclock higher. While on Vega 56 and 64, the power limit is locked, and you cannot overclock, you cannot BIOS mod it, since AMD pretty much just locked out custom BIOSes, and they basically don't let you BIOS mod anymore. The same as NVIDIA, which is, I think, is kind of ridiculous, because the one thing that I'm rooting for AMD for is that they're really open and they're really about the consumer, and they let the consumer do anything they want, instead of NVIDIA, which locks the consumer with a locked BIOS and you cannot even overvolt on Nvidia cards. At least AMD lets you do that, although the power limit is still locked. So that kind of sucks that you cannot BIOS mod it anymore, because that's one of the things that I was hoping Vega would let you do, and that should improve performance. Although one interesting thing is that even though the performance of the overclocking on Vega cards is not so great, so like here you can see Guru 3D achieves 1700 megahertz, and you can see that even, well, I guess the liquid edition ones on here, you can see that they don't achieve a high clock speed in any kind. So pretty much under 1700 and about 1600 something, 1500 ish. And the HBM memory can be overclocked to about 1050 or so from what I've seen. But then the Vega 56 cards, the HBM doesn't want to overclock much past 900 megahertz. And that's pretty much because AMD has locked down the voltage on the HBM memory too in the BIOS, and you cannot volt mod the card without ruining it with solder, and you cannot BIOS mod it, like I said, so you cannot really overclock the HBM memory too high. But there's one fix for the RX Vega 56, which I think is really interesting, since it uses much less power. So you can see that the Vega 56 card consumes about 200 watts, so that's a little bit about the GTX 1080s, and pretty much like the custom overclocked GTX 1080s. So that's not too bad, even though it's still less efficient than the GTX 1070, which it is beating in most games. So you can see that there's some lost potential in 56, and you might think that, oh, that's probably because it uses less cores than the 64, but some people have tested, and it's really not because of that, because somehow, see, 56 is beating the 1070 here, and it is beating the 1070 in most games anyways, so AMD has a clear win over the 1070 with the 56, although the 64, on the other hand, kind of trade blows with the 1080, so it's not too impressive, being that the 1080 is already more than a year old now, so we were expecting 64 to beat the 1080 Ti, which even the liquid cooled one couldn't do, so that's kind of interesting. Although in like Dirt 4 and some other newer games like Forza 7, somehow the 64 manages to beat the GTX 1080 Ti by quite a large margin. So I think that's pretty curious, and it might be a sign that there could possibly be more power on tap for Vega if developers coded correctly for that card. So hopefully that'll happen, and hopefully the performance will increase for Vega 56 and 64. But yeah, that's pretty much what I thought about it. I think that Vega 56 and 64, the 56 card makes more sense, since the 56 draws less power since it has less shaders, which frankly I don't think the more shaders in the 64 make any sense, since with the BIOS modded 56 with the 64 BIOS with the higher HBM voltage, you can overclock it to the same performance. So it doesn't really make sense why AMD put more cores in the 64 if it doesn't add performance. So I think your better bet will be to get a 56 card and BIOS modded to get the performance of the RX Vega 64, instead of buying a Vega 64, or even worse, the liquid cooled edition one, which is just ridiculously expensive and consumes too much power, and it doesn't make sense to buy. If you're looking for a performance card of the 1080 and Vega 64 range, well, you should have bought the 1080 from like a year ago. That's the truth, because the 64 really doesn't offer anything new, except for maybe if you use a FreeSync monitor like I do, then it might make sense, but otherwise a 1080 would make more sense to buy, since it uses also less power and overclocks better actually, since 56 and 64 doesn't actually scale very well with overclocks, except for the 56 with the HBM overclock that, like I said, made it as fast as the 64. But the 56 card, I would say, is a better choice than the GTX 1070, even though you have to factor in that overclocked GTX 1070s can pretty much close the gap or like match the 56 performance. But then you also get more future proofing with the 56, since it is faster in DirectX 12 games. So they should try again with their next generation Navi cards, which I hope will be better instead of being the whole mess that Vega is right now, especially with the prices. If you can see, they're really expensive now, so I don't even know if you can make sense buying a 56 over a 1070 right now with the prices. But yeah, if it comes down and the prices are similar to the 1070, definitely buy the 56. So yeah, that's it for this like review summary and product summary. This turned out to be longer than I expected, but it's because I covered two products, and also this is like a major product launch. But next time, if I'm just covering like a specific variant of a graphics card, I might just do a shorter video. But let me know if you guys like this type of video and if you want me to do more of it. So yeah, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed this video and hope you find it useful. And yeah, thanks for watching.